Hey everyone, welcome back to Falcons Central Radio Show on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I am Aaron Freeman over at falcfans.com. I'm joined by my co-host Scott Karasek. Should I plug the Sports Knot, Scott, or Falcoholic?
Sports Knot.
Okay. Yep, well, Scott's over at Sports Knot. You can find his stuff over there. And tonight we'll be talking about the Atlanta Falcons. We'll be talking about the draft as usual. But the main topics we want to talk about tonight is we want to talk about their 2016 schedule. That came out last week, so we'll get the chance to talk about it tonight. So you'll hear our thoughts on sort of how we think the season might go, some tentative, I guess, predictions for their record. It's still a long way away from the season, so we reserve the right to change our opinions later on. We'll talk about my crazy idea for trading up in the draft a little bit later, and we'll answer you guys' mailbag questions at the end of the show. So, Scott, let's jump right into the schedule. Pretty tough slate of opponents, wouldn't you say?
Part of it's the slate of opponents. Part of it's the order in which they have to play them. Like, on paper, Tampa Bay, New Orleans, Carolina, Falcons play them every year. Worst case scenario should be every year 3-3 against those teams. On paper, Oakland, Kansas City, Oakland, Kansas City, San Diego, they don't sound too tough. Denver sounds rough, but then you realize that they lost a good bit of their defense. So the AFC West doesn't look as bad as it was, as rough as it was last year. The NFC West, you still got Seattle, San Fran, Arizona, and now LA. The Rams seem like they'd be pretty easy. The Cardinals seem like they're a good team. Seattle's always a good team. And then San Fran's pretty terrible. So you've got some decent teams on. You got some good teams on there, some bad teams on there, just like every year. Then Atlanta also gets Green Bay and Philly. Philly seems awful. And then Green Bay, they're a good team, but after a while, the Falcons have got to beat them eventually, right? They can't just continue on this losing streak, right?
Yeah, I guess eventually they got to beat them. Might as well start this year, I guess. Yeah, I look at these opponents, and I think the Falcons are going to be tested a lot more in the trenches and by opposing quarterbacks this year than they were last year. We wound up playing what essentially amounted to 6 backup quarterbacks, I think, last year, if you want to include Kirk Cousins, since he technically was not the starter at a certain point before going into last season. But even still, it's still 5 backup quarterbacks the Falcons played. And I think we ended up winning like 3 of our games against backup quarterbacks. So basically against starting caliber quarterbacks, we were like 3-10 or something like that. So, that's going to be interesting to see how the Falcons adjust to that. And I think it's going to put a lot more pressure on their defense than we saw last year. The other thing is I think we'll play a lot more tougher teams, particularly teams that have better front sevens than we saw last year. We're playing a lot more teams that are really good at stopping the run. So that's going to put more pressure on our running game to step up. So it's all, to me, it's one of those things where I typically have noticed a trend over the years with new coaching staffs is the first year they come in and everything's great. They get the new energy, the new blood, all that type of stuff. And then the second year, there's always a little bit of a drop-off. More often than not. This is not a universal truth. But it's one of those things where I feel like if that happens here in Atlanta, even though, the team has improved in certain areas, it doesn't seem like they've improved enough to really match what their jumping competition is going to be in some areas. So it's going to be curious to see if they can sort of sift through that and overcome that this year. And I think that's going to be a real testament to Dan Quinn's coaching and the rest of his staff to basically, get them to rise up, as they would say. So I'll be interested to see how that plays out this year.
I mean, you do get the fun aspect of a new coaching staff and that first year, but I do think that you also, in subsequent years, get the idea that the schemes are going to be better filled with players. The coaches are going to finally get their guys, kind of deal. Like Dan Quinn last year may not have had the ideal personnel set. This year he's going to have a lot closer to that. I don't think it won't be until another 2 or 3 years till he has his ideal personnel. Okay. I think that's pretty safe to say. The Falcons aren't going to be close to what the Seahawks were. The Seahawks weren't the Seahawks until Pete Carroll's, 7th, 8th year there? Now, I'm not saying that the Falcons are going to spend 7 or 8 years, because Pete Carroll also didn't really have a franchise quarterback. Yeah, Matt Hasselbeck, but let's be honest here about Matt Hasselbeck.
Well, just to correct you, I mean, they went to the playoffs in his 3rd year there, or his 2nd year there.
They were 7-9.
Yeah, and then in the 2012 year, they were actually arguably the best team in the NFC, but they obviously ran into the buzzsaw known as the Atlanta Falcons. That was his 3rd year there. But the one thing I will say about Pete Carroll is by 2012, they already had like a top 5 defense. So, it didn't take them long to turn around that defense. And that was one of those things. That's one of the frustrating things about this offseason for me, was I didn't think the Falcons really have so far done enough to really enhance their defense for it to make that leap moving forward. So, I don't see us putting together a top 5 defense unless we really pull some magic tricks out of our hat in the draft this upcoming season. So
I do like what they've been doing as far as the signings. None of these big money signings. If you look at, outside of Sanu and Mack on offense, but I'm saying on defense, the defensive ends are not big money signings. Derek Shelby, his deal is really more of a 2-year, $6 million prove-it than anything else. Adrian Claiborne, pretty much the same deal. Tyson Jackson should get cut, assuming that they can get the right guy. I think they're hoping that they get the right guy in the 3rd round, a guy along the lines of like Bronson Kafusi, someone like that, to where either Jackson moves inside or he's cut off the team. At linebacker, Warlow, yeah, he's not ideal, but I don't think he's the long-term starter either. So Weatherspoon, if he comes back, should be okay. But again, not a long-term starter. Phillip Wheeler, I'd love to see earn a job should the Falcons not get someone in the draft who can start at a middle linebacker or weak side linebacker. He needs to take one of those spots. I think Upshaw is going to be the base strong side linebacker unless Reed can win the job. And then strong safety is really a need. And I like Ricardo at free safety, but he can be upgraded. There's a lot of spots. I don't think they're trying to upgrade everything this year or next year or even the year after to where, like, everything is a first-round pick, because you can't possibly do that no matter how good your defense is or how many picks you have. It's tough to do. Everybody's a first-round pick on your starting defense. Everybody's a first-round pick in your front seven the way the Panthers have, outside of, Charles Johnson and Kawan Short. That entire front seven is first-round picks.
Pretty much.
So it's really tough to do that. And the Falcons aren't too far off, because you got Beasley, Hageman, Babineau, Jackson. Those guys are all first-round picks or second-round picks. Reed was a second-round pick. Weatherspoon, if he earns the job back, will be a first-round pick. That has it. Wheeler at one point was a third-round pick. So, there's talent there as far as draft status, but is there really talent on the roster that's not too old or not too injured? And that's where the issues come in. But I digress. I think they've got the team. I think getting better players for the scheme long-term is how you build the team up. Because that 2012 Seahawks defense, it had a second year Richard Sherman in it,
Mm-hmm.
or it was either second or third year.
Second
And
year.
he was a 5th round pick, and he took a minute to develop. So the fact that Dan Quinn really does want to develop people, that helps out. That helps out quite a bit, because I don't feel like Mike Smith actually tried to develop talent.
I think people often criticize Mike Smith for not developing, and I vehemently disagree with that point. But, because I think a lot of the guys that they drafted did develop. They just weren't that talented. And when you're drafting 7th round talent in the 3rd round, and then you get a player that plays up to his 7th round talent, you can't blame lack of you can't make a guy better than what he is. And I think the Falcons' problems under Mike Smith had less to do with him developing. I think other than maybe Peter Kahns and Paray Jerry, I can't really think of a player that didn't develop to what they were supposed to be under Mike Smith. And if they didn't, they probably weren't that good to begin with. So I don't quite agree with that, with people saying that about Mike Smith and his regime. I think a lot of their problems, and I don't want to get fall on a Mike Smith tangent, but I think a lot of the problems they had where they put too much faith in their ability to develop guys and thought, oh, we can just put some bodies out there. And prominent example I always go to is that 2013 season when Julio got hurt, and they said, oh, we'll be fine with Drew Davis and Brian Robisky and Kevin Cohn and Darius Johnson replacing Julio Jones. We'll coach these guys up. No, they couldn't. And the season tanked after that point. So, I think Dan Quinn's put in the same position. I think we'll see what he is made of. I won't draw any conclusions based off of 1 year. And, we'll see how much improvement certain guys make. And that will be the story of Dan Quinn, either positive or negative in the long run. So we'll find out.
I agree. Well, let's go into the schedule.
Yeah, let's get into that. All right, so week 1, the Falcons are home, opening up their final season at Georgia Dome at home against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Scott and I both see this as a win, a revenge game against the hated Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Jameis Winston, and maybe we'll actually tackle him this time on a 3rd and 20 to pull off this victory. So, that's a game I do feel like the Falcons – I think it's an either-or sort of game. I think they're two relatively even teams, but I feel like the Falcons at home, first week of the season, they really don't have an excuse to lose this game, assuming, barring any major injuries or anything like that. So I think this is a win for them.
I have to completely agree. Barring Matt Ryan going down or them just doing something stupid in-game, like turning the ball over 6 times, I think they win this one, and I think they could win it big. I mean, as much as people talk about, the Falcons don't have pass rush, the Falcons, their offensive line's not the best, blah, blah, blah. It got a lot better with Mac. Even though Levitre's not great, I think between Mac and whoever they have at right guard, whether it's Chris Chester, whether it's Mike Person, I think the combination of whoever's there should be able to hold off Gerald McCoy, Akeem Spence, those guys on the inside. There's not really a great pass rusher on that team outside of Jacquez Smith. I like Ayers, but I think he's a complimentary guy. And then, I think they'll be able to hold off the pass rush. Mike Smith is very vanilla with his schemes. We saw that here for 7 years. He doesn't really like to blitz a lot of guys. He doesn't really like to get creative. It's a lot of line up 4 guys, rushing the passer, 3 guys dropping into zone at linebacker, or a bunch of guys in man underneath with 2 deep coverage. That's basically what Mike Smith did here for the majority of his time. That was the common thread of the defense. So I'm not too worried about that. And then on offense, J.R. Sweezy can't pass block, so that's going to be great. Hawley, Marpet, I'm not a fan of going up against those guys because I think they're both pretty good. on the offensive line. So but the Falcons should be able to create some better pass rush than they did last year against these guys, assuming that their draft goes well and assuming Derek Shelby pans out. Jackson, Evans. I mean, Atlanta's got two of the best corners in the league. They can match up with pretty much anybody. I'm more worried about Austin Seferian-Jenkins. I don't remember him being healthy either game. And I think if the Falcons go up against him, they're going to have a tough time keeping him covered. Doug Martin also very, very good running back. I mean, the Bucs have a great makings of an offense. It's their defense that I'm really worried about if I'm a Bucs fan, because their safeties are garbage. Keith Tandy, Brad McDougal, they're just they're Lovie Smith safeties. I'll put it that way.
I have a soft spot for Tandy, just because I thought he was good at West Virginia, and McDougal's all right. But you're right; they're definitely not a strength of their roster. I would agree with that on that point. And tight end wise, I'd probably be a little bit more worried about Cameron Brate than Seferian-Jenkins, since Brate I think put about 300 on us in one of those games. It seemed like that was ridiculous. Yeah, so I do think this is a favorable matchup for the Falcons. I agree with most of what you said there. Even if you had to, throw J.R. Sweezy under the bus a little bit there, taking shots at my guy Sweezy. But it's okay, Scott. I forgive you. All right, let's move on to week 2 where the Falcons go on the road. They face the Oakland Raiders. My third favorite team. And I think this is going to be a win, and Scott has this as a loss. So that's interesting, Scott. Explain.
They have the best offensive line in football. They have two of the better receivers in football. They have arguably one of the best young quarterbacks in football. They've got a talented running back group in Olawale Murray and Tywan Jones. They also have Roy Helu. Their offense, it may not look like it's a stacked offense, but it's got a lot of guys who contribute and know how to play football. On defense, I love the pairing of Mack and Bruce Irvin. That's going to be a lot of fun out there. Malcolm Smith, Ben Heaney, those guys are good in coverage, great in space, good tacklers. Dan Williams, Justin Ellis, big fatties up in the middle to plug the run. I mean, the only real holes that I see on this team for the Raiders is a strong safety, because I'm not a huge Larry Asante fan, and then right cornerback because David Amerson's been a bit of a bust. But top to bottom, they might have one of the best starting groups in the NFL. Like they might legitimately win that division this year, and I don't feel bad saying that.
Okay, interesting. I appreciate the Raiders' love. I will say that Amerson was actually pretty good for them last year, but I think
he was playing safety last year too. He wasn't playing corner.
No, he was a corner. He was the number 1 corner last year. He did pretty well last year. I agree with everything you said. I do think the Falcons figure out a way to win it. I think their defense is going to be very good. I think it's going to be a very tough test for the Falcons. But I do ultimately think, because I don't really see Sean Smith being able to lock down Julio in that game, I feel like the Falcons will have a chance to win it in the end. Yeah, so I don't have much else to add. The Raiders are a really good team. They're going to be an up-and-coming team. They should be a fun team, and I agree with you. They certainly have a chance to win that division, given the step back that Denver should have and the fact that Kansas City is Kansas City. So, yeah. Now, the Week 3 game, a big game, Monday Night Football. This one is in New Orleans. This is the infamous anniversary of the Katrina game where Steve Gleason blocked the punt that pretty much just ruined any dreams and hopes that the Falcons would be able to win that game. So this is going to be an emotionally charged game for the Saints. The Falcons haven't won a road Monday night game since 1979. So I have this one as a loss. Scott says this is going to be a win. Scott, I'm sure you have some explaining to do.
It's the Saints. One of these friggin' Gleason. But at the same time, law of averages. You can't lose every single Monday night road game away since 1978 forever. You can't lose every single Gleason game forever. Eventually, you got to get luck at some point on your side. And considering last year was a Gleason game and Atlanta was undefeated coming in and New Orleans was all supercharged and amped up and blah, and they won that one. Congrats. However, I don't see how this team got better this offseason. Their starting guards are Tim Lelito and Cyril Lemon. You know, Zach Strief, still garbage. Andrew Speed, if he finally starts, might be worth something. They do have the best left tackle in the game. I'm not going to go against that. And Unger is a solid center, but their guards are two of the worst in the NFL. I like Willie Snead. I like Brandon Cooks. Those guys are pretty solid. Fleener and Hill are solid. Ingram's a good running back. CJ Spiller's a good change of pace guy. Travaris Cadet's solid. Drew Brees, top 5 starter in the NFL. So, I mean, their offense is still going to put up points, but I don't like their guards. For the longest time, Brees has always had good guard play. That's allowed him to step up in the pocket. Atlanta finally has some defensive tackles that know how to pass rush a little bit in Jarrett and Babineau. And I think if Shelby plays inside, you'll have Shelby get some pressure. So when you got Jarrett, Babineau, and Shelby rotating, I do think the Falcons have a shot there. On defense, the Saints historically bad on defense. And I just don't see how they're going to get better this year. They need probably 2 or 3 years worth of draft picks to really improve on defense. I like Nick Fairley and John Jenkins inside. I like Cameron Jordan. But I like Stephon Anthony at middle linebacker. But after that, it's a bunch of shit. Jarris Bird's been a bust. Keenan Lewis has been always injured. Kenny Vaccaro doesn't really know what position he's supposed to play. You know, they went out and got Laurinaitis, who mediocre. Donnell Ellerbe hasn't been what he was in Miami. There's just not a lot of – I'm not seeing a lot of talent on this team. Like, they just need talent. They need to straight up spend two draft classes in here. And as any Georgia fan will tell you, Damian Swann is garbage at nickel. So if you see him in the nickel, I think you're going to see Atlanta sliding over Julio Jones into the slot a little bit more, just so they can take advantage of that spot.
Okay, all valid points. I think their pass rush is going to be a lot better. I think they're going to get Shaq Lawson in the draft, so I think they're going to be able to line up Lawson, Jordan, and Fairley all next to each other. So that's going to create some problems for the Falcons' offensive line. I think Kyle Wilson is technically the nickel cornerback. Just a small correction there, not Damian Swann. So I don't think we get that lucky break. I think ultimately it always boils down to whether the Falcons can beat the Saints, and this has not happened very often since Sean Payton and Drew Brees have been there. It boils down to them being able to get pressure on them. And you're right with their changes they made at guard. They have some holes to plug there. Maybe they move Pete inside, which they did last year for a couple of games. And he was all right there. They might draft somebody that's halfway decent to sort of plug up another spot. So it'll be interesting to see what they do in the draft, if they can sort of plug some of these positions that are right now glaring weaknesses so that they're not huge liabilities going into the season. But to me, it's one of those things where we saw it last year where, you know, the first couple of games of the season when we were 5-0, we didn't really see any good quarterbacks during that time. We played Brandon Weeden, Sam Bradford, Eli Manning. And I know, you know, some people think it's blasphemous for me to say that Eli Manning's not a good quarterback, but Eli Manning hasn't really been a good quarterback for like 4 or 5 years. And, you know, of course, whoever the heck the Texans quarterback was, Ryan Mallett, I guess, and Kirk Cousins before he started playing well. So it's one of those things like we played the Saints and immediately they just carved up the middle of our defense. It was just wide open. Safeties couldn't cover Ben Watson. Linebackers were missing tackles left and right against running backs and tight ends and whatnot. And, they throw Fleener out there now. I think he's going to be probably better than a lot of people think he will be in New Orleans. Basically any wide receiver that has or tight end that has gone to New Orleans has blossomed in that offense over the last decade. So I don't think Fleener is going to be the exception to that rule. And it just always seems to be like if we can't get pressure on Drew Brees, he's just going to sit there and carve up our defense. And I'm optimistic that our pass rush will make gains this year, but I don't think it's going to be to the level where we can really just tee off on Drew Brees, not in the Superdome, not on Monday Night Football, there's just going to be too much emotion, and it's just going to probably get it out of the Falcons' hands pretty early on, like it always seems to do in these Saints games, these big Saints games. And I don't expect them to sort of break the streak and win, lucky number 13. They've lost 12 straight road Monday night games, and I don't think 13 is going to change. So we'll see how it goes. Now, the Falcons close out the first quarter of the season in Week 4 against another division rival, against the Carolina Panthers at home. Scott and I both agree that this game is probably going to be a loss. You have anything to add to that, Scott?
I think the Falcons lose probably both games versus Carolina this year. Carolina's just a better team right now. Atlanta's got a while to go. Now, if they do luck out and win this one, I'm going to be ecstatic because that means starting basically 3-1, which would be huge for the team going into the next stretch. But as of right now, I don't see them winning this one. Carolina's going to be pissed off because they lost to Atlanta last time. We ruined the perfect season. They're going to be mad because they lost the Super Bowl. I think unless Cam Newton's out of the game, they just obliterate us.
Okay. I think it's going to be a close game. I don't expect Carolina to be as nearly anywhere close as good as they were last year. They just had too many things go right for them last year to expect them to be able to repeat that. I still think they should be the favorite to win the division. They probably will win the division. They'll make the playoffs. But I do feel like they're going to struggle. They're going to have a bit of a target on their back this year. And some of these games like this one, I do think the Falcons could give them a real run for their money, but they'll probably end up, Greg Olsen will wind up roasting Kamal Ishmael or somebody like that on the final drive or something like that, and it'll cost the Falcons or something like that. So, yeah, I mean, I'd like to predict the Falcons to sweep the Panthers or even split with the Panthers, but, spoiler alert, I don't have them winning that Week 16 game either, so I'm with you on that, Scott. All right. The next game is Week 5 at Denver, one of the two Falcons, I guess, technically Western, not West Coast, but Western road stand. The Denver game is the first one. I have this one as a loss. Scott has this as a win. I'll just go out. I'll just say I still think the Denver defense is going to shut us down, even though they've lost some pieces. I think, they are the one team that is perfectly constructed to shut down the Falcons offense. They'll put Aqib Talib on Julio Jones. If Julio goes to the slot, they'll put Chris Harris on him. So he's going to face a top 5, top 7 corner regardless of where he lines up on the field. And Von Miller is still Von Miller, and he's going to absolutely wreck Ryan Schrader. I feel sorry for Ryan Schrader in that game. And I just don't see the Falcons putting up enough points against Denver's defense that even regardless of who they have at quarterback, it's going to be like a 14-13 sort of game. And I just don't see the Falcons winning that type of game.
I guess for me, I think this comes down more to the Falcons' defense than their offense. I see it as a very low-scoring affair, but I do think the defense could potentially keep the Falcons in it a lot more than I guess you feel. Russell Okung kind of sucks. He's their new starting left tackle down there. Donald Stevenson's solid at right tackle, but I do think the Falcons' pass rush is going to be a little bit better. Robert Myers, who's taking over for the cut Manny Ramirez, he's pretty terrible. So I'd love to see the Falcons just attack him inside. Paradis, Garcia's pretty awful too. Like, either of those guys can really move. So I think with the Falcons' speed on the inside, they'd be able to attack the quarterback. I think the fact that it's Mark Sanchez is huge for Atlanta. Even if they go out and get Kaepernick or another quarterback, I don't think he's going to be anyone great, just because their chance to get even a above average one passed. Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, again, those guys are good. No denying that. But what do the Falcons really have to do in this situation but get pressure on the quarterback and then stop the run? And that offensive line, you're putting in 4, potentially 5 new starters on that offensive line this year, putting a starting quarterback brand new. It's too many moving pieces. And you've got 2 tight ends that they're going to be down. They're not going to have Owen Daniels. They're not going to have Vernon Davis. Both those guys are gone. So you've got potentially 7 new starters on that entire offense. On defense, you lose Malik Jackson. You lose Danny Trevathan, 2 of their bigger, better pieces. Yeah, they keep Wolf, and I don't think Sly Williams is really that great. I think he's an average player. I think Wolf's pretty good. I think Miller and Ware are pretty good. And Brandon Marshall is solid, but they're missing a starting middle linebacker on that team. They're missing a guy who could do what Trevathan did. He made all the calls on the defense. He made sure guys were lined up. He hit the keys from what he saw. That's a bigger loss than anybody wants to give him credit for. He's a true starting middle linebacker in the NFL. No matter what scheme he's in, Danny Trevathan is a true starting middle linebacker that you can build a team around. The Denver Broncos lost him. When you don't have your defensive captain in there, you don't have your guy who can keep guys aligned in the right spot. You don't have a guy who can – I mean, as of right now, Corey Nelson's the starter. Or Todd Davis. Neither one of those guys is anywhere close to Trevathan. And I hate to say this because Atlanta needs a middle linebacker. There's no one in the draft that's close to Trevathan either. So you've got a talent gap there. That's just, there's not any talent at one of their spots. So.
Okay. Okay. I don't think it's going to be that big a loss. I think the thing that Trevathan, not to diminish Danny Trevathan in any way, but his value, I think, was really covering tight ends. And, I don't think they're going to have that much trouble covering Jacob Tamme. That's what I'll say. No slight to Jacob Tamme, but I don't feel like he's going to go for 120 yards in that game because Danny Trevathan's not there. So I think other than that, that's really where Trevathan's sort of plus value came. I think you can sort of throw a replacement level player there, and assuming that I hope for the Broncos fans' sake, they're not starting Jared Crick, who's terrible, and they start Vance Walker at that other DN spot, or get someone like Jerron Reed in the draft or something like that, so that they can shore up the middle of their defense. I think if the Falcons are going to beat them, it's going to be because we can run the football on them, because it ain't going to be because we can throw it on them. Not with Von Miller, not with Talib and Harris. We're just not going to throw the ball. So it's going to come down to us running the football down their throats, which, Wolf is good. Sly Williams, again, you're right, is not very good. Vance Walker still have a soft spot for Swagger Vance. So if he's in there and if they can get someone decent at the other inside linebacker spot that's not a liability against the run, then I think they'll be fine, but we'll see how it goes.
I mean, their best bet might be using Shaq Barrett there, honestly.
That'll be interesting because he's got the athletic profile to be something. I don't know what it'll be, but it's something.
At least a solid run defender. Yeah. But again, I don't see this ridiculously great defense like they had last year. Malik Jackson took on so many double teams. He opened up so much for that second level. Danny Trevathan was that captain. So I think losing, probably your third and fifth best defenders outside of, Von Miller and Aqib Talib, I'd say are their top 2. And I'd put Chris Harris as their fourth, or as their fifth. I'm sorry, their fourth. So, losing your third and your fifth best defenders on the best defense in the league, it makes it tough. You don't have the same kind of talent that you had in the past. So I do think the Falcons stand a better chance against Denver. It's the next week that I'm worried about. The Seahawks, despite not having an offensive line that's competent, still have one of the top quarterbacks in the game. They still have a solid receiving corps. They still have a damn good group of running backs. They've still got one of the better defenses in the NFL. They've still got one of the better secondaries in the NFL. They brought back Brandon Browner, which is smart. Because let's just put this bluntly, Kerry Williams was garbage. So you got the Legion of Boom back together. Wagner, Wright, they're still good. You know, Kevin Pierre-Louis should see some time as the starting strong side linebacker this year. Super athletic linebacker. They brought back Chris Clemens. So there is talent there. The Seahawks are still going to be a great team. And then add in another year where Jimmy Graham has finally got some chemistry with Russell Wilson. And I could see the Seahawks destroying Atlanta. That's going to be the real test. How the Falcons play against the Seahawks, assuming that the Seahawks do something smart and finally draft a left tackle to protect Russell Wilson, I think they'll be okay.
Yeah, I mean, basically what I was going to say is it's a home game for the Seahawks. It's really that simple. Like, the Falcons aren't good enough to beat the Seattle Seahawks in Seattle.
Pretty much.
You know, maybe we'll be there in a couple of years, but we're not on that level yet. Okay. Next game is Week 7, back at home against the San Diego Chargers. Afternoon game, so I guess that gives San Diego a little bit of help. But Scott and I both have it as a win.
I just don't think San Diego's a good team. Like, as a whole, I don't. I don't see where they're – I mean, yeah, they got some good receivers in Benjamin Allen and Stevie Johnson, but, like, their line's okay. Their tight ends are okay. Their quarterback's okay. Their defense is okay. It's not great. I mean, I like Atauchu and Ingram. Hopefully they'll finally kick it off the way that they can. Especially Ingram. Ingram's like 27. He needs to finally be the guy he was in college. He was damn good in college. But if you got Atauchu and Ingram together and they get some pass rush, it'll be fun. Teo and Perryman on the inside. That defense is going to be fun to watch. And I do think that they get they either take Tunsil high or they're going to take DeForest Buckner if he falls to them. I think it's one or the other. And either way, you'll be good there. They got a solid, unspectacular, but solid defense, solid offense, just nothing to write home about. And they're coached by Ken Wisenhunt on offense. So he does a good job. John Pagano does a good job with the defense. But I don't think that they're this ridiculously great team. So,
okay, yeah, I think the Falcons can beat San Diego, but I do feel like they have some potentially favorable matchups. That if they can exploit those matchups, particularly their offense, like this could be a game that's a shootout. I think you gave Phillip Rivers a little bit of injustice by saying he's okay. I think he's a lot better than okay. I think obviously Antonio Gates is a little long in the tooth, but we all know that doesn't mean much when you're going against the Falcons defense. You can be 100 years old and destroy our defense, at least historically speaking. So unless that changes, I expect a good day for Antonio Gates. Woodhead is going to be a problem for us. Anytime we faced a team that had a good receiving running back like that, absolutely killed us last year. If Warlow's a starting middle linebacker going into the season, or if the Falcons wind up drafting Reggie Ragland or pretty much anybody in this draft that's not named Miles Jack, I think that's still going to be an issue for the Falcons. So it's going to be an interesting matchup for the Falcons defense. You're right, they have to exploit their offensive line, which was not very good last year, but has at least the capacity to be above average. So this is going to be an interesting game for the Falcons. I feel like of all the wins I predicted, I'm least confident about this win than the other ones, just because I feel like San Diego could catch some teams off guard this year, especially if their offense lives up to their potential. Okay, we're at the midpoint in the season. That is a Week 8 home game against the Green Bay Packers. Scott and I both have this as a loss.
It's a game against the Packers. Falcons haven't beat the Packers in feels like forever, so that's all it is.
I want to say 2010. Like the regular season game against 2010, where Curtis Lofton got the fumble at the 1 yard line. I remember that game. That play, at least. I think that was 2010. Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, I mean, it's Aaron Rodgers. He's going to be in the Georgia Dome. You know, that home field advantage is going to be canceled out because of the favorable conditions. It's one of the reasons why I think Phillip Rivers could do some damage the week before. You know, Jordy Nelson's going to be back. I feel like our corners can I don't know what we'll do with Randall Cobb if we don't fix the slot. And we'll see how Alfred does this year. But
I want them to go out and get Cortez Allen. Not just because he's my boy, but because I think Cortez Allen could play in that slot. I think he could play against the tight ends that we go against. He showed early in his career when he was actually matched up against tight ends. He did a good job. He was playing well in the slot early in his career. Then they moved him outside and he had issues. So I'd like to see what he could do in Atlanta. He is a taller, longer corner. He fits the athletic profile that Dan Quinn likes. Might as well go out and get him.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I just know he was pretty terrible for the Steelers last year, so he wouldn't be the first name that jumps to mind. He was injured all year, though. Yeah. So yeah, the Packers always going to be a tough matchup. It's going to come down to us getting pressure on Aaron Rodgers. If we can do that, I think that's going to be the statement throughout this entire season. We can get pressure on their quarterbacks. We stand a much better than average shot of winning these games. If we can't, then I think the pass rush is going to be improved. I don't know if we're going to be to the level where teams are now going to be afraid of our pass rush. And that's obviously the goal, when you can basically say, yeah, we can pressure any quarterback, any offensive line, because our pass rush is that good. I think there'll be some games this season where our pass rush will look good, and I think there's going to be some games where they'll look like they have, basically for the last 8 years when we haven't really had a great pass rush. So, that'll be the big test against Green Bay. The following week is a short week. That is a Thursday night football game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I have this as a loss. Scott has this as a win. This, to me, is going to be the point in the season, at least based off of the way I see it going. At this point, going into this game, I have the Falcons at a 3-5 record. And I think this short week game is going to be the point in the season where I think a lot of fans are either going to be must win. If we win this game, we're going to the playoffs. If we lose this game, let's take the rest of it. I think, that's how fans tend to be. So I don't feel like the short week on the road against Tampa Bay, I don't feel like the Falcons are going to sweep the Bucs this year. So I have this as a loss.
I have it as a win. I think if the Bucs can somehow sweep the Falcons last year, despite honestly not deserving it, I think the Falcons can sweep them this year and return the favor. And I think there's going to be a bad taste in the Falcons' mouth about both games, and I do think that the Falcons sweep. I think it's going to be an interesting situation, to say the least. But again, I think the Falcons just match up better.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Week 10 at the Eagles, the second road game in a row. Get a little bit of a layover for that short week the previous week. And Scott and I both have this as a win. Now, I will say, even though I have the Falcons beating the Eagles, I do sort of think the Eagles will win that division, the NFC East, just because I don't respect the Giants. I don't respect the Cowboys. They're always 8-8. And basically, to win that division, you just got to get to 9-7. And I think the Eagles, at least from a roster standpoint, are the most complete team in that division. So I feel like, I've been predicting them to win the division the last 3 years. So I figure at least one of these times I got to get it right. So that's what I'll say. But I think the Falcons will beat them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think the Eagles are a bad team. I think they might win the division. I don't really care if they do or not. But, I really don't. They're the Eagles. I kind of like seeing them lose just because Ben Natan's a fan, and it's fun seeing him miserable.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think the reason why I think we'll beat the Eagles, I think they just don't have the secondary players, or let me say the corners, because I think their safeties are arguably one of the top 3 pairs of safeties in the NFL. I don't think they have the cornerback play to handle Julio Jones any better than they did last year. Now, I'm sure they won't make the mistake of, leaving Byron Maxwell or Nolan Carroll or Eric Rowe or whoever it is this year on an island against Julio like they did last year. But, if you're going to play more zone against Julio, that's not a rest. That's not a way to get out of the pain that Julio inflicts on your defense. So I feel like pretty much a lot of these games that I'm predicting the Falcons win, ultimately it boils down to, in the fourth quarter, do I feel like Julio can generate a 30 or 40-yard play to set up a game-winning field goal from Matt Bryant? And I feel like Philadelphia, it's a favorable situation for the Falcons. So that's why I have them winning that game. Now, Week 11 is the bye week, so the Falcons get a little bit more rest. They come off the bye against my second favorite team, the Arizona Cardinals, in the Georgia Dome. But Scott and I both agree that this is probably going to be a loss.
And I think it'll be a closer loss just because the Falcons will have 2 weeks to prep for it. They'll have only played 1 game in 23 days or something like that, because it's a Thursday to a Sunday, and then it's a full bye week after that. So they'll basically have 2 bye weeks back to back. I'm not saying Philly's going to be a bye week, but I'm saying that the extra couple days before Philly and then the bye week after. So they should be getting healthy, should be good to go for that last stretch of 6 games. I just think Arizona's a better team, especially if Carson Palmer's healthy. Now, if Carson Palmer's not healthy, I do think the Falcons win that one, just because Arizona lives or dies by Carson Palmer. And he's played, 13, 14 games each of the last 2 years. He's played in 13, got injured for a couple towards the stretch. So as long as Carson Palmer's healthy, Atlanta loses. If Carson Palmer's done or hurt or in just semi-injured in some way, I think the Falcons win.
Okay. Yeah, I got the Cardinals winning this one. I do feel like this is a very winnable game for the Falcons, though, because they match up. So as long as they can block Calais Campbell and keep a lid on John Brown, and as long as they don't let Larry Fitzgerald carve them up, which I hope we've gotten past that point in our Falcon fandom where Larry Fitzgerald's not going to put up a ridiculous amount of yards on us like he did in 2008. I feel like this is a very winnable game for the Falcons. They just have to contain a certain few areas of the Cardinals team. It's just one of those things where if it gets into a shootout, Arizona's a team that can put up points in bunches, and that worries me a little bit. I don't know if the Falcons are at that level yet. At least we'll have to see. That's going to be a big question mark going into the season. Can they score, not necessarily at will, but close enough to it.
If they could score 30 points a game, I think having a new center will help out a lot more than anybody realizes, especially one that doesn't lose games by snapping the ball slow, throwing timing off, missing his blocks, throwing the ball into the dirt, basically, snapping it off of his own ass. James Stone. Yeah. So a center that can actually snap would be great. And I think that's going to help out a lot. I think that was I think the Falcons probably were 10-6 last year if their center could have actually snapped the damn ball.
Okay, I don't agree, but it's fine. I think they probably win one more game if their center they had better center play, but we'll see. We'll see.
But it is a tough defense. Calais Campbell, Corey Peters, Chandler Jones, Frosty Rucker, Golden, Kareem Martin, Deion Buchanan, Kevin Minter. It's a lot of talent on that D. That's not even mentioning Patrick Peterson, Tony Jefferson, Tyrann Mathieu, Tyvon Branch. They have a lot of guys on that D that are just damn good football players.
That they are.
And it's deep.
Yeah. When Sean Witherspoon's your backup, playing special teams, that tells you something about how deep they are.
Well, that and Witherspoon was coming back from injury.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, they didn't blink. It's like, oh, he's just a special teams guy. No problem. We're not skipping a beat. Okay, the next week is an interesting game because I guess this would technically answer the question that we got from ATL Justin Tyler, which is the biggest surprise win for the Falcons this season. And Aaron, you have to pick one. I guess this one will qualify because this is one of only 2 games that I have the Falcons winning and Scott has them losing. And anybody that's a regular listener or watcher of this show knows that Scott's the optimistic one and I'm the negative one. So I guess, winning this Week 13 game at home against Kansas City would qualify, Justin. So, yeah. Scott, can you explain why you have the Falcons losing this one?
I just think that you fall into that lull and you fall into that game where you're like, man, this team, we should win. We've got the advantage. We've got a better team here. And then I look at their roster and I'm like, I don't know, like Bailey's good, Jay Howard's good, Dantari Poe's good. They've got a damn good defense, good pass rush. Their offense is solid. They're probably going to spend a couple picks on their line just to shore it up. That guard, but I'm not seeing the huge holes in Kansas City to where I'm like, yeah, this team's just garbage. No, it's a solid team top to bottom, and I just think the Falcons don't really match up well. They need to be able to – I think Marcus Peters could hang with Julio for a little bit at least. I do think that Julio's going to get his yards. I don't know if he'll get his touchdowns, but he'll definitely get his yards. I don't think he's going to get 200, though. I don't think he's going to carry the team. They've got a great run defense. When you've got Howard and Poe and Allen Bailey up front stuffing the gaps, it's really tough to run against that. We saw that this past year. They've got a solid offense that can play ball control. They went out and got Mitchell Schwartz to play right tackle, which upgrades their line quite a bit. I don't see a team that's got a lot of holes. And I wish that I did because I don't want to lose to the Chiefs because I don't have a lot of Chiefs fans that I think are good people that I follow on Twitter. However, I just don't see the holes on this depth chart for them. Okay. Like wide receiver. That's a hole. But
I think the Chiefs are a solid football team. I think that's what they've become under Andy Reid, and I think they're a team that probably on paper, you're right, should beat the Falcons. I feel like Julio is going to destroy Marcus Peters in that game. Marcus Peters is a very talented corner, and I think eventually he's going to be considered one of the best corners in the league. I don't think he's at that point now. I think if they think he can handle, I think he's going to destroy Marcus Peters in that game. So I think the other interesting thing about that game is going to be if Justin Houston is back dealing with whatever the knee issue he has this year, if he's back at that point and if he's playing like Justin Houston, because if he's not, then the Chiefs front seven loses a lot. Like, it's not to say that they're going to suck or anything like that, but basically as long as Jake Matthews doesn't get absolutely destroyed by Tamba Hali's bull rush, which could happen, I'm not in fear of what those Chiefs can do front seven wise, and if that basically means they're not going to be able to pressure Matt Ryan consistently, then again, because Julio's going to destroy Marcus Peters, I think the Falcons have an opportunity to really light up that Chiefs defense, which you probably wouldn't think, probably based off of their sort of consistency and their relatively high ranking. And offensively, I think if it gets into a shootout, the Chiefs stand no chance because their offense isn't really designed to put up points in a whole bunch of bunches. It'll depend a lot on if Jamal Charles is there. There's talk about him getting traded at some point in the next week or two during the draft. So we'll have to see about that. If he's not on that roster, they're in. Travis Kelce's good, but he's not going to put 30 points. Oh God, I hope he's not going to put 30 points up on his own. So if Jamal Charles isn't being Jamal Charles, then the Chiefs are a very beatable team, if you ask me. So week 14 is another road game against the Los Angeles Rams. Both Scott and I have this one as a win. I'm assuming, Scott, you think we'll be facing a rookie quarterback behind a bad offensive line.
I think rookie quarterback behind bad offensive line is a nice mix of things that the Falcons need in order to win, and I think that's a game that they should win because of that. And San Francisco, same thing, rookie quarterback. So LA and San Francisco, I mark those as wins just because they're rookie quarterbacks. I don't think either team really matches up well with the Falcons defensively. Even though LA does have a good defensive line, I don't think that they've got the corners who can match up with Julio. So I think Atlanta will win that one. I think they'll beat San Fran. I think they'll be pissed off that they lost to San Fran last year in a game that they definitely should have won. And I think they'll win that one pretty easily.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Week 16, we're at Carolina. Again, as we mentioned earlier, we both have this one as a loss. I don't know if we have to elaborate too much more on that. And the final game, the last game in the Georgia Dome, Scott and I both have us predicting the Falcons closing it out with a win against the New Orleans Saints. So, basically the Falcons should be ashamed of themselves if they lose that game. The league has set it up that they can at least close out the Georgia Dome with a win against their biggest rival. That would just be sad and pathetic. They lose that game. So you have to predict the win at this point. It's just too shameful to think of the alternative.
Let's put it this way. This is Atlanta's version of a Gleason game. So last day with the Georgia Dome, you want to send it out with a bang. And then from there, you don't really worry too much about it, but you want to send out the Georgia Dome with a bang and beat your most hated rival, the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah, that's what it is. Like, they can't lose that game. They just can't.
No, there really is. This might be a game where it means nothing for either team except Atlanta potentially having a winning record and the Saints potentially not having the number one pick. But
yeah. So if you guys, your math skills are a little bit off, I have the Falcons finishing with an 8-8 record with these predictions, and Scott has them at 9-7. So, and if I'm being completely honest, this is the optimistic version of the schedule for me. Like, it wouldn't shock me at all if they finished 6-10. That's kind of how I really feel. But, for the sake of this show, I thought I'd bring a little bit of positivity and predict them to be 8-8. So, in the dark recesses of my mind, I see them as a 6-10 team. So hopefully that changes in the draft. I'll be a lot more optimistic about this prediction if they wind up getting some good players in the draft. And speaking of getting good players, Scott, let's talk about my crazy idea that I proposed a little bit in my takeaways column on Monday over at FalcFans.com. Tweeted about it. Did not get a very popular reception on Twitter. But I'll go elaborate a little bit more because I think it 140 characters doesn't do it justice. My proposal is I think the Falcons maybe better off trading up in this draft than trading back in this draft. It's just, to me, one of those things. I look at the alternatives to trading up, and it's you either sit there at 17 and you wind up, in my opinion, waiting on the player that's probably not going to be there, like Shaq Lawson or Sheldon Rankins, or you wind up reaching on a second-round talent like a Darren Lee, like a Reggie Ragland, like a Leonard Floyd. And to me, that's just like that's not a party I want to go to. And then the other option is obviously to trade back in the draft, and that's probably ideal. But, as they say, it takes two to tango, and hoping that someone's going to offer you a good trade option. I don't want to be stuck in a situation where the Falcons are stuck either reaching on a player or hoping that phone rings. So I feel like the Falcons might want to be a little bit more proactive and go and get a really good player, arguably the best player in the draft. I believe that. At least one other person out there, a smart person, Josh Norris, believes that. And especially now in light of, the recent reports and rumors that his combine recheck didn't go as well as hoped. I don't know if that's a smokescreen. I don't know if that's someone, picking high, wanting him to drop and putting that information out there that will cause some teams, that were pretty good on his medical to rethink it and maybe overthink it. I don't know. So I can't speak on that. But I feel like if Miles Jack falls out of the top 5, falls to 6, falls to 7, I feel like the Falcons, if they go up and get him in a trade that does not give up their 2017 first-round pick, like, this is the core piece of the thing. If they can get a trade going that does not include next year's number 1 pick, I think it's a worthwhile move. I don't feel like, even if that means losing 2 number 2s and a number 3 or whatever the case may be, I don't feel like that's as big a deal. I think if you're wind up trading with a team like Baltimore, you could throw Robert Alford into that deal. You'll take a big step back at cornerback this year, but you were going to lose Robert Alford anyway next year. So to me, if I can say, well, he's going to play one more year anyway, and I'm going to have to replace him next year anyway, might as well use him to get a really good impact player right now that can help the team right now, long term, in Miles Jack. And, we'll deal with the consequences of having a replacement level cornerback 2 this year, and then we'll figure it out next year. So that's my proposal. Scott is not a fan, as you can tell.
Well, because you also come up with this idea that Matt Elam's actually good.
No, I never said that.
Fucking
Just because I included him in the trade does not imply that I think he's good. I included him in the trade because I know Baltimore wants to get rid of him. I know he has history with Dan Quinn. We need another body at strong safety. He's just a body in a contract dump that's just like, hey, we'll take that bust off your hands, Baltimore, as a solid to you, as a reason for us not to give you our number 1 pick. That's why I was including the trade. Not because I think Matt Elam is good. It's because he's just a guy. We need a body, and it's a contract dump.
And I wouldn't include Alford either because the Falcons have more than enough cap next year to keep him.
They're not keeping him, man. That's a pipe dream. They're not going to pay him.
They've got more than enough money to keep on him and Trufant for years.
They're not going to pay $40 million for Alford and then $70 million for Desmond Trufant. They're not going to spend over $100 million on cornerbacks. It's just not going to happen. They already have a $70 million Julio Jones. They have a $100 million Matt Ryan. They're going to throw $70 million at Desmond Trufant next year, and that's going to be it. And they're going to be like, Robert Alford, we want to keep you, but you're going to have to take a big discount. And based off of we've seen how the market is dictated this past year with Janoris Jenkins got $60 million. 2 years ago, Chris Culliver, who was a nickel cornerback, got $30 million. Like, Robert Alford is going to get paid by somebody next year. And the Falcons aren't going to be willing to match that just so, we can afford to keep him, but principle-wise, they're not going to be like, we're going to invest $100 million in cornerbacks in a zone-heavy scheme that doesn't blitz a lot. That just makes no sense from a tactical standpoint. If you're going to invest money and resources into any position in that type of defense, it's going to be on your defensive line. at your safety position, at your linebacker positions, where it's much more critical to have multiple good players than it is having two good corners. You have Desmond Trufant. You can get a replacement level player at the other spot and live, as Seattle has done for many, many years.
There's also the thought that they could just take a corner next year too.
Yeah, I mean, it's
But
not going to be.
I wouldn't trade Alford just because I don't think it makes sense to trade Alford and to throw him in there. You're not going to win as many games this year without Alford because the Falcons play a lot of teams that have two solid wide receivers. You're already down Jalen Collins for 4 games. It doesn't make sense to me.
Okay. Well, as I just mentioned a couple of minutes ago, I don't think the Falcons going to win that many games this year anyway. So I don't think it. I think if you can get a difference maker like Miles Jack, who can be, assuming that the knee issues, like, again, I don't know about the knee issues. I think it's a lot of smoke personally, but I don't know. Assuming that his knee isn't limiting on his career, like we saw with Jonathan Vilma. But then again, Vilma played like 7-8 years in the NFL, had 2 or 3 Pro Bowls. So it wasn't that big a limiting factor. He just didn't have quite the longevity that, people hoped he would have. A player of his caliber should have had. But, if you can get that type of impact player in the middle of your defense that can be probably the best player on your team other than Julio Jones from a talent standpoint, I think it's worth it, especially if you wind up giving up a guy that you're not going to keep next year anyway. And if you can keep your number 1 pick next year and use that on a pass rusher, use that on a top-level safety, use that on a top-level offensive lineman or a tight end or whatever, I think it's worth it. Miles Jack plus that first-round pick, that's a home run for me and for my book, as opposed to settling for all right players, but like nobody that you're sitting here and be like, oh, man, that guy's going to be I know people have differing opinions on some of these other guys that we could, wind up settling for later on in the draft. But I just don't see anybody, outside of a couple of guys that we're probably not going to draft anyway, that are really going to be worth waiting around to get later on in the draft. So I say be aggressive, go get them. If you can keep that number 1 pick next year, it's worth it to me. Okay, now on that note, we got a couple of mailbag questions in regards to Miles Jack. So we will answer those. The first one comes from the Dirty Bird 1998. Hope he began being a fan in 1998 and wasn't born in 1998 because that makes me feel old. I'm sorry. Would you accept this trade for Jack? Atlanta's first, second, and third, and 2017 second for Baltimore's first and fifth. I'm assuming, Scott, you're going to say no?
As good as Miles Jack is, I don't think it's worth it to trade up for him in this year's draft. He's the best player by far in this year's draft. I still don't think he's worth it to trade up for because you're giving up too many picks, too much depth. At the time of the Julio trade, I did say that the trade wasn't great, but the pick was amazing. I still feel that way about the Julio trade. I said they had to hit on everything. I've defended it because I liked the end result of having Julio Jones, but overall it's been a bad trade if we're looking at it. But even looking at it in the context that 2012 wasn't really a great draft, 2011 was a great draft, you had to trade up and get one of those talents. I don't see this year as that kind of draft. Miles Jack is a great football player. But even despite that, he has too many questions for me to say, hey, let's trade up a second-round pick next year, a first, a second, a third this year, or I don't get it. I understand loving Miles Jack. I really do. I don't see. Honestly, I think they should trade down. If you're asking me, trade down to like 25 or so, pick up a third-round pick, take Leonard Floyd. I know Aaron doesn't love the idea of Leonard Floyd, But if you trade down and pick up a third-round pick and Leonard Floyd is better than sticking at 17 and taking Darren Lee, right?
I guess, yeah, it's better. Assuming the third-round pick is not terrible, yeah.
Yeah, assuming the third-round pick's not completely garbage. But trade down, pick up a third-round pick, maybe pick up a fifth-round pick if you can at the same time to make up for the forfeited pick. So maybe you get a third and a fifth trading down to 25. You let someone like, I don't know, 25-ish, like let the Vikings trade up. Say they fall in love with Laquan Treadwell. They trade up to 17. They get a third and a fifth to Atlanta. Atlanta's now got 6 or 7 picks again in the draft. And 4 of them are in the first 3 rounds. So you can get in the third round, maybe Bronson Kafusi. Maybe you somehow look out into Deion Jones. Even though I'm not a huge fan of Deion Jones, he's still a solid football player, and in the third round would be worth it. Or one of those linebackers like Sua Cravens falls. Say in the second round you get Keanu Neal. Now your draft looks a lot better when you've got basically Floyd, Kafusi, Jones, and Neal, 4 guys. You may not have 4 Pro Bowlers, but you have at least 4 guys who could come in and be average starters. Maybe not the first year, but second, third year, be average to above average starters in solid roles. With clear, obvious fits within the defense that Dan Quinn runs. Keanu Neal is instantly the starting strong safety. Leonard Floyd would instantly be either a Leo or a strong side linebacker, depending on the play and how you used him with Vic Beasley. You could also throw in some 3-4 looks that way. You'd have a combination at defensive end and defensive tackle where Kafusi's coming in, rotating, playing in base, playing in nickel, and creating pass rush for you. You'd have Deion Jones out there as a weak side linebacker who excels in zone coverage, going out there playing zone coverage and being probably one of the fastest weak side linebackers that Dan Quinn's ever had. He'd have to get better as a tackler in space, but I feel like you can teach tackling. You can't really teach speed. You can't really teach, instant ability to come in and cover the way that Jones has in a zone scheme. So yeah, you need a middle linebacker at that point. But hey, look, the 4th round. Say in the 4th round you get Nick Vigil. And yeah, I realize every pick I just said was spent on defense, but I think that's what Atlanta needs to do. Spend pretty much every pick they have this year on defense. Trade down, get more picks, spend them all on defense. Get more bodies there. I feel like the offense for right now is fine.
Okay.
I mean, what's the biggest hole on offense right now? If you consider that the team likes Sanu and they think he's the number two wide receiver, they're not going to spend a resource to replace him. Right guard.
Right guard is probably the position I have the least amount of confidence in right now.
But even then, you can go out and either put Mike Person there, have Chris Chester come in. There's a couple guys out there that you can go out and sign and at least have them compete for right guard, where if they win, you're not going to go, oh my God, right guard's absolutely just fucked. The way that when you look at the Falcons, I don't know, middle linebacker, weak side linebacker positions right now, you kind of look at it and go, they're kind of fucked.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of how that's one of the reasons why I like to enter the Dirty Bird 1998's question. I would accept that trade because again, it doesn't give up next year's number 1. But like that's one of the reasons why I feel like the Jack trade makes sense because I personally feel like you need difference makers on defense. Like you can't just get these mid-level, above average sort of starters and think you can build a good defense that way in the NFL. I think you need to have like the spine of your defense needs to be 5 or 6 Pro Bowlers. And I just don't see that on this Falcons roster. I think Beasley can get there. I don't think any linebacker we have is anywhere close to that. I think Alford's could be that guy. But again, that's for 1 year. Trufont's obviously that guy. None of our safeties are going to be that guy. So I feel like the draft that you propose, and that's part of the issue I have with, trading up is a bad strategy. I understand that principle. I agree with it wholeheartedly. I know it's a bad strategy. I know in the long run you're gonna hurt yourself more than you help yourself. You might help yourself in the short term, but you're gonna hurt yourself in the long run unless you can go out and get difference makers later on. Trading back is a good strategy because it gives you more opportunities to hit on players. I think the problem here is if the Falcons don't hit on those players, this draft, even though they might get 3 or 4 starters as Arthur Blank is, sort of dictating to them, they will get guys that will start games, but they will not get guys that will make them any closer to being the sort of top 10 defense that they need to be if they want to be, a playoff team. And again, you can say, well, Rome wasn't built in a day, because I've used that line many times over the last year. But to me, it's just one of those things where, unfortunately, I think for this coaching staff, they're going to be put in a situation that's unfair to them, where there are high expectations from a good deal of this fan base that this thing is going to get turned around quickly. And I think the path that they're going down, people might have to be mentally and emotionally prepared for the fact that the Falcons are going to be a 6 to 8 win team, not only this year, but the year after that, and the year after that. And until they can start getting some real difference makers on their team, on their rosters, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, I think they might be mediocre. And, if you can live with mediocrity, then that's fine. But, I don't think it's setting up well for them. And trading back, while it might be the smart strategy, I think ultimately if you wind up just getting 3 or 4 mid-level starters, you have done nothing. You just wasted an offseason pretty much.
All right, well, I'm going to the argument of the Seahawks. And I think the reason why you don't like trading back is because you don't think Dimitrov can evaluate mid to late round talent. But in 2011, the Seahawks traded back twice. And sure, their first and third round picks were pretty bad in James Carpenter and John Moffitt. But they did draft KJ Wright. They did draft Richard Sherman. They did draft Byron Maxwell. They did draft Malcolm Smith, all in the 4th through 7th round. 4 players that started on their defense. One of them wound up being a Pro Bowler. The other 3, above average starters. Why can't the Falcons do something like this year? Again, I'm not saying this draft is 2011. It's probably closer to 2012. And oh, look, they traded back again. So in theory, yeah, it doesn't make sense. But hey, look, they traded back. They get Bruce Irvin. And in the 2nd round, they took Bobby Wagner. 3rd round, they took Russell Wilson. They took Jay Howard in the 4th, wound up cutting him because he wasn't a great fit for them. But still, wound up doing pretty well. Jeremy Lane's been pretty solid. Winston Guy's been pretty solid. J.R. Sweezy started a guard for them for a while as a 7th round pick. So while, yes, I'm not a huge Sweezy fan, that draft was a solid draft, and they traded back. The draft is all about maximizing your swings, as you've said in the past. Yet you're sitting here saying, oh no, the reason why the Falcons are bad is because they didn't maximize their swings. Yet you're advocating for this trade up, which would minimize their swings. They'd have to have Miles Jack be a 10-year, just absolute gangbusters pro, which I'm not saying that he won't be. I honestly think he will be. I think he'll be the next like Brian Urlacher type in the NFL. I think that's the ceiling. And to me, Urlacher is one of the top 4 or 5 linebackers of all time. So that's high praise from me. He's not Ray Lewis, but like, who really, let's be honest, there's like 2 guys who have ever been that good. I'd say Ray Lewis and Butkus.
I'd probably throw Singletary in there. I was thinking Singletary, but yeah, Butkus.
Yeah, Ray Lewis and Dick Butkus. And then Singletary would be 3rd for me. And then you got Urlacher. And I think Jack has that potential to be up there with Urlacher by the time his career is over.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, no, I hear you, Scott. I'm not trying to sit here and try to convince people that trading up is this genius idea. It's got its risks. It's a massive, massive gamble. I just, you talk about that 2011, 2012 draft. The Seahawks drafted better in those 2 years than any team in the NFL. And it worked out for them because they absolutely nailed it. And since then, they haven't really drafted anywhere close to that level since then. And it's one of those things where you just have to – that's the sort of crapshoot nature of the draft. Like, you're absolutely right. If the Falcons trade back and hit on their picks, it's great. If the Falcons trade back and miss on the picks, then trading back – it's ultimately at the end of the day, it's about hitting on your picks. You got to get good players, and you got to develop those good players. And I just don't have that much confidence that the Falcons in this draft, given their needs, they have massive needs at linebacker, and this is probably like the worst linebacker draft that I can recall in recent memory.
I don't think it's that bad. I think the best talents that are in it are guys that have questions about their knees. Jalen Smith and Miles Jack are absolutely fantastic talents. If Jalen Smith didn't have that question about his knee, I'd have a top 5 grade on him. He and Jack would be my top 2 players in this draft. And I like Reggie Ragland. I just don't like him for Atlanta. I like Sua Cravens. I like him as a weak side linebacker. I like Darren Lee as a weak side linebacker. I don't see the ideal middle linebacker for Atlanta outside of Nick Vigil. That's the one guy who I'm like, Atlanta needs to draft him for middle linebacker in this entire draft. And I like Travis Feeney as well, but I don't think that he's an ideal middle linebacker. I think he's more of a weak side linebacker. But again, there's talent there. There's a lot of talent there. And I could see them taking Aaron Wallace from UCLA later on, maybe as a 7th round pick. I think he's a pretty solid linebacker. I'm a lot higher on this class than I think you are. I see a ton of talent. I just don't see – I got 42 guys who I've got draftable grades on. I just don't see a ton of high-round talent. I see a lot of guys who will be special teams, depth guys. I see a lot of guys who will be role players. I see a lot of guys who will be spot starters. I just don't see a ton of guys who are instant difference makers like what you're looking for. However, my view is you've got to upgrade the weakest members of your team to begin with. And if your defense is being dragged down because Paul Warlow's not a great fit, you find someone who's a better fit. If your defense is being dragged down because Justin Durant can't cover anymore, you go out there, you get Deion Jones in the 3rd round and throw him out there and let him grow with the team and see where his potential takes him. If at worst case he's KJ Wright, you're okay. If best case he turns into Levante David, well, then damn, you just got a nice steal in the 3rd round in one of the fastest linebackers in the draft.
Okay. Well, yeah, we have some different philosophical. I don't believe that you, especially at the draft. Like, I think if you're going to address weaknesses, that's what you do in free agency. I think the draft is, we believe in this. We believe in building up, particularly in this scheme. We believe we need to be strong on the defensive line. We need to be strong at middle linebacker. We need to be strong at free safety. And we need to have one good corner. We already have a good corner. We have a couple of components of the defensive line we need to get better. And I feel like you invest in the key points of your roster. You build a foundation of your team. If you're a running team, you invest in the running backs and you invest in your offensive line. If you're a running team and you have a bad tight end, you don't use a number 1 pick on a tight end, right? It's just unless that guy's Rob Gronkowski, the next Rob Gronkowski, or the next Jimmy Graham, it's just kind of a waste of time. That's not where your core of your team is. And I think that's part of the issue I have with the Falcons and I don't think this is a great linebacker. I think it's Miles Jack and, with Jalen Smith being his injury, you're right. If he was healthy, I probably wouldn't like him as much as you do, but he'd still be top 7, top 8. So, that's really splitting hairs there. But I think like Ragland's fine. Like I like Reggie Ragland, but I think he's probably the only guy in this draft that I would look at and say, oh yeah, he's definitely, or he has a good chance of being a better NFL player than Stephen Nicholas was. And I think everybody else in this, you'll have linebackers that will start. There may be a guy later on that I'm lumping into this group of mid-level players that winds up emerging and becoming the next Telvin Smith and next Danny Trevathan, and that tends to happen a lot. But it's just, to me, it's one of those things where I feel like the Falcons are in this position where they're just going to wind up, putting a bunch of average players out there, and then wondering, a year or two later, wondering like, why aren't we good on deep? Why Drew Brees put up 350 yards on us? And it's like, yeah, because you've over-invested in players that you shouldn't be investing that highly. You shouldn't invest a number 1 pick in a weak side linebacker in this scheme. Like, all you're asking that guy to do is to fill some run fits and to cover the flat in the zone. That's all he's got to do. Like, you don't need a great player there. You need a great middle linebacker, because if you have a liability there, as we've seen the last couple of years in this scheme, what middle of the field is going to be wide open. Tight end's going to gas you. Running back's going to gas you. If you don't have a guy that can get out there and jump the underneath routes from the wide receivers and the running backs and drop down the seam and cover the deeper routes from the tight end, your defense is going to be a massive liability. And that's the problem the Falcons have. And part of the reason why I'm in favor of this Miles Jack trade, because otherwise you're looking at an offseason where the Falcons basically sat on their hands at middle linebacker. Like, okay, they tried to get Danny Trevathan, they tried to get Jarrell Freeman, but they didn't get those guys. And they tried to get James Laurinaitis, didn't get him either. And then other than that, like, they're going to come out of this, like, drafting Reggie Ragland was the best middle linebacker candidate in this draft, and he's not even a scheme fit. That's a massive failure by this team. And so to me, it's one of those things where, like, almost the only way that makes sense for them to be able to come out of this and not just wind up with another mid-level starter, a Reggie Ragland, who's basically, I like Ragland, but he's probably just going to be Curtis Lofton, which is an upgrade. But 4 years from now, you're going to be like, yeah, we can do better than Reggie Ragland. It's not what you want to be doing with a first-round pick. And to me, it's they have to be thinking about making a bold move to get Miles Jack, because otherwise their plan of action at middle linebacker, which was the biggest weakness probably on their team last year, if not, it's certainly on their defense, if not on their team, and they did nothing. And
we could go on this for days and hours, and we've got all next week to talk about the draft.
Okay.
So the next show is just straight about the draft. At this point, I don't like the trade. You do like the trade. Let's go into this next question about how bad we think Miles Jack's knee is.
All right. So Falk Lover 69 asks, how bad do you think Miles Jack's knee is? How far do you see him falling?
I think it's the standard legitimate question about cartilage. Of how long will this cartilage last and how long will things go? Patrick Willis had a similar issue back in 2007, and he fell to like 13, 14. I think Miles Jack will be fine. NFL teams are questioning it. There are 3 or 4 teams in the first 10 picks that have said, we don't really feel comfortable with his knee to take him in the top 10. I don't know past that. I know Atlanta loves him, but, I mean, the sky is also blue. The grass is also green. And Atlanta is sitting in a spot where if Miles Jack falls to them, I mean, they're going to fall over themselves sprinting to the podium, and hopefully they don't break their nose landing on that first step. But they will take Miles Jack at 17 if he's there. Again, the sky is blue, water's wet. How far do I see him falling? Pick 5. Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah. I mean, I think Jacksonville will take him if he's there.
Yeah.
If they pass on him, and if Baltimore passes on him, it would be tough for me to see him falling out of the top 10.
The only way
know.
Jacksonville passes on him is if they take Jalen Ramsey because Ramsey fell to 5.
Yeah. I don't know exactly who will take him, but it's just hard for me to see Jacksonville, Baltimore, San Francisco, Tampa Bay all passing on him, and Philadelphia. I just don't see all 4 or 5 of those teams passing on him if he's there. So I don't think he's going to fall out of the top 10. Again, I don't think the knee issues are as big a deal as probably people think they are. Again, the comparison I heard was Jonathan Vilma, and again, I mentioned earlier, Vilma, was a 7 or 8 year starter in the NFL and played at a very high level for many of those years. Did deal with knee injuries, missed some time. I think his last year in New York, I think he only played like 7 games, if I recall. But I don't think it's going to be that big a deal as much as people, maybe he won't play past 31 or something like that, but we'll have to see.
He's 20 now, so if the Falcons got 11 years out of him and he didn't play past 31, everybody would be happy with that pick. All right, let's go into the next. Sorry, I kind of want to speed the questions up a little bit this week. I got some stuff I got to get done. Vienna Falcons asked about Greg Cosell calling Shaq Lawson just a guy on a recent episode of, I don't know what RTFP is, but
it's the Ross Tucker Football Podcast.
Okay. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and Evan Birchfield has a similar question. I saw some mocks where Atlanta seems to pass on Shaq Lawson and go with Lee, with Shaq going around 29. Do you think there's a chance we would pass on Shaq, my favorite player in the draft, if they're at 17? To answer Evan's question, no, I think Shaq Lawson is going to be very high on the Falcons board unless Miles Jack is there or something like that. As for Greg Cosell, I listened to that podcast and I thought, I don't think people not liking Shaq Lawson is that big a deal. Like, to each their own. I get it. Like, he's a guy that doesn't automatically wow you. A lot of people, especially when you're so ingrained at looking at size and length and first step quickness and all this type of stuff, and that I get why some people are a little higher on Kevin Dodd than Shaq Lawson, particularly if you pay attention to the second half of the season Clemson games. So, like, it is what it is. Like, I think Shaq Lawson is going to be a very good NFL player, but other people not being as high on him, all right, it's fine. I'm not losing any sleep over it.
That literally has nothing to do with any of our evals on him either. Like, nobody actually cares what the guy next to him says about this player at all. Like, at all.
All right. Next question comes from ATL Justin Tyler. Who do you see as a realistic partner for the Falcons to trade back with? Scott, you mentioned Minnesota earlier. Do you have any other teams?
They're the one that stands out because they really, really, really want a wide receiver in this year's draft. They really like not Tunsil. They really like Quan Treadwell. They're the one team that I kind of see 23. Atlanta would pick up their 3rd and their 5th, or their 3rd and their 6th, and take that trade in a heartbeat. I would too. Because Atlanta would say, hey, we did this trade 3 years ago for Desmond Trufant. We want to get a 3rd and a 6th, and we'll give you a 7th in 2 years. And we'll just do that trade. Atlanta could trade down 6 spots. None of these teams in between Atlanta and Minnesota, I think, would go after Leonard Floyd. I think that's their target this year. Again, Aaron's probably like, no. But I do think that's their target. I think Minnesota's target is either Josh Doxson or Laquan Treadwell with a lean towards Treadwell. And you trade down to Minnesota and take Floyd, pick up a 3rd, pick up a 5th. I think you've got a better team because you've got those extra picks. and because you just got a better team.
I'm hoping Seattle is a realistic partner because I think they obviously need some offensive tackle help, and maybe there's a run of guys in the middle of the first round, and they're looking at someone like Jason Spriggs or Jermaine Ifedi, who have the athleticism that they kind of like in their zone blocking scheme. So maybe they come up to get one of those guys, jump ahead of the Colts, jump ahead of the Jets. If Paxton Lynch is still around, I feel like somebody's going to want to come up and get him. But I do kind of sort of expect that if quarterbacks go 1 and 2, like many people are predicting right now, then I think someone's going to jump up higher and get Paxton Lynch before he falls to 17. So, those would be I guess so. Denver, the Jets, Cleveland, if they trade back, would be some teams that I would imagine might look at Paxton Lynch at 17. Okay, the next question comes from the Dirty Bird 1998. He says, could you see Jeremy Cash converting to weak side linebacker in the future? He seemed most effective around the line of scrimmage.
I mean, Cash as a weak side linebacker would fit. I don't like the idea of taking a safety as small as Cash is and moving him there. He just doesn't have the frame to really fill out. I'd rather just take him, put him at strong safety. I think that's his best fit for Atlanta. Ideally, if Atlanta's taking a safety and moving him over, the one guy that really stands out to me would be Darian Thompson. He's got the frame to get up to about 230 if you really wanted to.
Okay. I don't think Cash will convert to linebacker here in Atlanta because we do have we do use a box safety. So if you're a safety that's better in the box, then you don't have to move the linebacker like you would in other teams. But I would imagine some other teams looking at Cash more as a linebacker than the Falcons. So if he winds up, with a team like the Jets, who with Todd Bowles, were able to convert Deion Buchanan to a linebacker. If they draft him to replace Demario Davis or something, then I could see Jeremy Cash moving the linebacker for them. Wispa 2000 says, who should the Falcons target to play middle linebacker?
I like Nick Vigil. I mean, I really like Nick Vigil. I think he's the right guy. I think he's got the intelligence, the speed, the quickness, the coverage ability. I mean, he's got to get a little bit better at shedding blocks. He's got to get a little better at using his hands to shed blocks. But he's got the physicality there. He's got the quickness there. I'm surprised he's not being mentioned as higher, but some guys like Aaron might say that he's just a guy. So let's hear what Aaron thinks.
Aaron would probably say that. He's fine. I think he has a ceiling of being an average NFL starter, which I think is the case with a lot of linebackers in this class. I think Miles Jack would be
the worst middle linebacker in the NFL, or one of the bottom 3, we'll say, to an average starter. Is that not an upgrade?
Again, I don't think you can live with an average starter at middle linebacker in this game. I think you need a good player or your defense. It doesn't make a difference. But yeah, Miles Jack would be my pick, but obviously, that would require a trade up. If he's not the choice, maybe I throw a flyer at Antonio Morrison if he's there in the 7th round. I like his game. He's got a low ceiling just because athletically he's not going to be able to match up in the NFL. And he has some issues with his leg or something, and he has some off-field issues that I don't know much about, but I've heard people talk about him. So, yeah, he would be the one other guy that I'm like, yeah, I like him as a player. He's not going to be great here, but, put him there as a body for a year until you get somebody better next year. I wouldn't mind him. Nigel Christensen asks, what are your thoughts on Daddy Nicholas?
I mean, he's awful. Just
Okay.
I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Like I try to like Daddy Nicholas. I really do. He can't play the run. He's not big enough to really affect it in terms like he uses his 220-pound frame like a 203-pounder, not a 235-pounder. And like he's okay speed wise. He's just very poor. Like he's just not a good football player.
Okay. I don't really have a strong Daddy Nicholas take. I've seen a little bit of him over the years. I've liked what he did in college. I thought he was productive. I didn't look at him and say, "Oh man, he's going to be a great NFL player." As a poor man's Bruce Irvin, I think he could do that. I know he's visiting the Falcons this week or something like that, so we'll see. Cookie by Nature asks, any sleepers you suggest the Falcons take a look at?
Nick Vigil, Silverberry Muhan.
Silverberry Muhan.
Love that name, but not just because of that. Victor Oki. I really like Tavon Young at a Temple, but he's a little too short for the scheme. I really, really, really like Daryl Worley out of West Virginia as a potential safety candidate. But I'm the kind of guy who likes to take a safety and slide him over to, or take a corner and slide him over to safety. I mean, at edge, I would love to see them, at guard, I'm going to continue to bang the table for Jake Brendel or Evan Bone, because those guys are just two of the better ones that I've seen. They both played center in college, but they can play guard in the NFL and be perfectly fine. So those are the names that I would go after.
Yeah, I wish I had some names for you guys, but I don't do that deep a tape study pre-draft. One guy I did, like as a possible late round pick for the Falcons was James Burgess, the linebacker for Louisville. I feel like there's a corner that I like, but I can't think of who it is. So, maybe I'll have a longer list next week, Devontae. Falk Lover 69 asks, how does the Rams-Titans trade affect who the Falcons will pick or trade with at 17? I don't think it's going to affect them at all. It's one of those things where I think the Titans, what they're looking at from a pick standpoint, they're probably looking at defensive back help or offensive line help in the first round, or maybe a wide receiver, which is probably not the area where the Falcons are really overlaps with the Falcons, unless you thought the Falcons going to take a safety at 17. What it does do is I think now there's no question that the quarterbacks are going to go, at least Wentz and Goff are going to go earlier than probably a lot of people were projecting them to be. Like I know I had Wentz going in the top 3 and I had Goff going number 7 at San Francisco. And it sounds like, the Rams will take somebody number 1 at quarterback, whoever they like, and then somebody else is going to come up and get the guy that they like at some point in the top couple of picks. So that will allow some top 5 guy to drop, and that might push down a top 12, top 15 guy. Maybe that person is available at 17, maybe. Basically we are hoping that Paxton Lynch, teams see the other quarterbacks go off the board. Someone's like, we got to get Paxton Lynch now. They move up to get Paxton Lynch, so that pushes somebody else down. Other than that,
yeah, I don't really think it affects the Falcons too much. So, I don't think it really affects the Falcons too much. Did we hit this one where it says awesome mocks where the Falcons passed on Shaq Lawson to go with Lee and Shaq goes around 29?
Yeah, I tried to bridge that into the first one. If you
okay, yeah.
The Falcon in Hawaii, Dustin asks, if the Falcons take Carl Joseph at 17 in the draft, would it be considered a reach for Atlanta for that position?
For that player, for that position, yes. I like Carl Joseph, but 17 is way too rich for my blood based on his injuries.
I don't think it's a reach. I think Carl Joseph is that good. I think it's a gamble because of his injury, but I feel like he's worth it. I think he's the best safety in this draft class. I think he'll be, I know some people think Ramsey's a safety. I think Carl Joseph is better safety than Jalen Ramsey is. Not a better player, but a better safety. So I would do it because I think he is a difference maker at that free safety position. That, like Ricardo, love Ricardo, but I don't think he's going to be that guy.
All right.
The Dirty Bird 9888 asks, if Falcons stay at 17 and draft someone in the trenches, who would they take?
I mean, Shaq Lawson. They take. I could see them going for Joey Bosa, obviously, if he falls. I don't see them taking Sheldon Rankins. I know Aaron's been banging the table for Rankins. I just don't think they really have him that high on their board. Leonard Floyd, if you're considering the trenches. If you think offense, you think offensive line. There's not really a first-round guard that's there. Unless they surprise and take Cody Whitehair that high. I just don't see a guard that's really worth a first-round pick. I could see him trade down, maybe take Cody Whitehair, but I don't see a first-round pick there. So in the trenches, I think you're looking on the edges, not really right up the middle.
Yeah, Lawson, I do think I hope they like Rankins. If Rankins is not high on the board, then the draft board is wrong. Offensive linemen, I don't think they take Whitehair there, even though he's probably the best fit for the scheme. They have shown interest in Jack Conklin and Jason Spriggs. Both of those guys are tackles, but I think Conklin has the skill set to play guard. The question is, does he have the athleticism to play in the scheme? Spriggs definitely has the athleticism. He'd be a perfect fit in this outside zone scheme. The question is, does he have the physicality that you want for a guard in this scheme? He's a little too tall, a little too soft, I guess, as a run blocker to really love his fit there. Other than that, maybe Agba. I don't see the Falcons taking Spence that high. If they really want to upgrade their pass rush and Agba's athleticism and his length, they might take him, but that's probably a reach as well. Isosceles Kramer asked, 3 realistic players we could draft at 17 that each of you would love/hate.
All right, 3 that I would love. I'm a fan of Floyd. I'm a fan of Lawson. I'm a fan of Darren Lee. 3 that I would hate. Ragland, just because I think he's an awful fit. Andrew Billings or any of the big defensive tackles like Ashawn Robinson. I'd hate any of those. I just don't think the need at nose tackle is big enough to take one in the top 17. At 17. I would just hate the idea of taking a defensive tackle at 17. Unless it is Sheldon Rankins. I would love for them to take Sheldon Rankins. I don't think they actually do it.
Okay. 3 that I would love: Rankins, Lawson. I'll say Joseph because he's one of my favorite guys in this draft. 3 that I hate. I'm not as hateful to Leonard Floyd anymore as I was before, but I still would not like that pick at all. Darren Lee, I would not be a big fan of that. I wouldn't hate the Ragland pick because I feel like they're backed in the corner. But I'm trying to think of another player that I'd just be like, what are they doing? Pretty much any wide receiver. So, yeah, I guess I would hate that pick. Did we already answer this one? Okay.
I feel like we have.
Okay.
I feel like we're both pretty much. I think we answered this one last week about the first 3 picks being defensive players.
Yeah.
When I said it, I'm thinking that it probably will be.
Yeah, and I think I said they'll take a tight end.
Yeah.
Okay. This question from Dustin, the Falcon in Hawaii, I don't really understand it, but I'll ask it anyway. After carefully evaluating numerous prospects, name your top-rated player for each round 1 through 4.
So ideal mock draft for the Falcons is what it sounds like. For me, ideally, assuming like realistic situations happen, it'd be Leonard Floyd. It'd be because I'm assuming Shaq Lawson's going to be gone. It'd be Leonard Floyd. It'd be Sua Cravens, or actually no, Leonard Floyd, Keanu Neal, Deion Jones. That'd be the ideal first 3 rounds for me.
Okay. I'd probably go realistically. I'd say Sheldon Rankins 1, 2 Keanu Neal, 3 either Carl Joseph or Justin Simmons, whoever's there. I prefer Carl Joseph, but I don't know if he's going to be there. I think Simmons has a chance. And in round 4, Joe Tooney, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, Joe Tooney in round 4 will be fine.
Evan Burfield asks, would you use our 7th round pick on Jalen Smith if he's there?
Yes.
I would.
I realize, again, I'm not a huge fan of his knee injury. I'm saying he's never going to be what he was. But if he's there in the 7th round, he may not play in 2016. That's fine. If worst case scenario is we get a depth guy at middle linebacker who's a special teamer and that's all he is for you, isn't that what most special teamers are anyway? Or most 7th round picks are anyway? So why not take that?
Yeah, I mean, I get the logic behind it. I just, I don't trust the knee. And I think
low risk, high reward is what I'm saying.
I mean, I look at it like, okay, he's going to sit out this year. He's going to come back next year. And we don't really know what he's going to come back as. And to me, when we get to that point, maybe he's good or maybe he's just average. And then at that point, you're like, well, the guy we're going to draft in the 5th round in 2017 is going to be better than him anyway. So I just feel like, what's the point? Like, get somebody that even if it's going to be a guy that doesn't have the upside that Jalen Smith has, just get somebody that I know exactly what this guy's going to be, as opposed to I'm taking a flyer on a player that could be good. And part of the reason, if you had asked this question probably a year or 2 ago, I probably would have said absolutely. But looking back on it, all these sort of redshirt sort of draft picks, the 49ers have spent a ton of picks on these guys the last few years. Oh, this guy's hurt. He'll sit out this first year. We'll get him back in year 2. Not a single one of those has worked out for them. So I'm like, why do you think it's going to work out with the Falcons? So I just generally am not a big fan of that type of move. Just get somebody that can actually contribute this year and next year. Isosceles Kramer asks, I know we shouldn't or won't, but if we did draft a quarterback late, who would you prefer?
None of them. All these quarterbacks suck in this year's class. All of them that are going to be taken late. I wouldn't want one of them. They're all awful.
Okay. I haven't done a ton of quarterback work, so a couple of guys that I've seen that I like, if they're there late, I take Jacoby Brissett. I take a flyer on Trevon Boykin. Basically anybody that's athletic that can run around. So that's what I would do. They'd be at least fun to watch in the preseason. Okay. Dustin the Falcon in Hawaii asks, do you see Quinn drafting any players from the Florida Gators considering his history with the team?
Yes. Ideally, Keanu Neal. He loves Keanu Neal.
Yeah, I would say Keanu Neal, probably in round 2. Maybe Brian Poole in round 7. I know Florida has a decent tight end that they might go after on day 3. McGee, I think, maybe.
Yeah,
So
okay.
those would be probably the guys I don't think they'll get Jonathan Bullard. I don't think they'll get – I don't know who else is on the team. Alex McAllister. So, okay. Evan Birchfield asks, if Roddy refuses to retire and is willing to be paid almost nothing, do you consider resigning him?
That's a tough question. I would love to. I just think he has to be okay with being a wide receiver 4, and I don't know if Roddy will be okay with that. So I would consider it, but I don't know if I would actually pull the trigger.
Yeah, I mean, this is a fun hypothetical, but Roddy pretty much burned that bridge with his comments about Kyle Shanahan after he was released. So, would I consider it? I mean, I consider it. I probably wouldn't do it. I would think about it. I give it 5 minutes of thought. Do it the Falcons? Would the Falcons? No, they're not going to do that. I mean, you can't basically call out the offensive coordinator and be like, "Oh yeah, you can come back." No, that he burned that bridge. Okay, the Falcon Hawaii says this question is for Aaron. Assuming your love for Sanu is real, can you express some positives that he could bring to the offense? I can do that. He's good after the catch, so he'll get a couple of big screens this year. He'll get a couple of drag routes that he'll turn into some big gains. He will make some highlight reel catches. He'll win a couple of times in the red zone. He'll win a couple of deep balls. He's an okay blocker. He has the size to be a good blocker. Maybe he'll be better in Atlanta than he has been in Cincinnati. Yeah, I mean, and he'll post great Instagram videos online, so there'll be some positives. All right. Evan Birchfield asks, do you have any draft day / night traditions?
I normally make chili on draft day. I realize it sounds like a stupid tradition, but it's just what I like to do. And get a can of that like Tostitos cheese and put it on the side, and just sit there with a bag of scoops and watch the draft and eat chili and queso and have friends over if they want to come over and write articles and such.
Okay. Yeah, I think the last couple of years I'm probably eating wings on draft day or night because, they're my number one favorite food. And last year, Scott and I were both on a Google Hangout with the Carolina Cat Chronicles guys last year. And I think they might be doing that again. So maybe that'll be a new tradition when the Falcons pick, jumping on there and giving our live thoughts,
I did. I'm not doing that.
You're not doing that? Okay. Well,
no, they didn't ask me to come back.
Oh, okay. Well, that's awkward.
No, I don't want to go back. I don't like those guys. Like, I like Joey, but I don't like the guys that they bring on the show for that. I like Joey. I like Tony. I just can't stand those other guys.
Okay.
Like T-Money and stuff. Like, just no.
Okay. All right, guys. I believe that is it. Yeah, okay. That's all of our mailbag questions for this week. We'll be back again next Tuesday. Send in your questions. Use the hashtag Falcons Mailbag. You can tweet at me. I'm at Falcons. Scott is at Karasik S. You can check out the show's Twitter handle. It's at Falcons PFC. Be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes on the Falcon Central Radio. Go to ProFootballCentral.com. Check us out there. Rate and review us on iTunes. That's where people can find us more easily. And, I think that's it. So we'll be back next week to talk all about the draft. And then the week after that, we'll be reviewing the draft. So you guys know what's on deck.